As Jeremiah said, stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, for you will find a rest to your souls. We begin today to talk about pathways, and our creative folk have given us a bit of the theme of a pathway, kind of going off into the woods and into life, and we want to talk about pathways that we should follow, pathways that we should take as a church together, and pathways that lead to the Lord. The leadership team at Tri-State Fellowship has met together. We've been reading together in various works and studying and praying together over an extended period of time, seeking to understand what would be those constituent elements of what God's particular vision is for this church and family, and how to work those timeless truths that need to be the constituent elements of any church that's seeking to follow the Lord, and to package them in such a way that particularly speaks to the DNA and the personality of who we are as a church as we move forward. And so, over the next 5 weeks, this being the first, I want to share with you this statement of vision that we have come up with. And here it is stated, that we envision a multi-generational community of theologically sound believers who manifest God's character by applying biblical principles to daily life, encouraging one another spiritually, and relating the gospel to our culture. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff put in there. And if you look at this next slide, what I've done is kind of put it into some colors for you. And it really breaks down into kind of 5 major pieces here. The idea of the cross-generational community, secondly, who are theologically sound, and then in terms of manifesting God's character, there are kind of 3 parts to that, applying biblical principles to life, encouraging each other in the spiritual things of the Lord, and also then thinking beyond these walls and into the culture of the day, and how do we relate Christ into that culture. You know, as I think back over my life, I have 4 extensive church experiences. Each has strengths and weaknesses, but the topic of today, this multi-generational aspect of the local church, is one that I have thought about a great deal over the years, and there are 2 reasons for that. The first is because I reflect back upon what a tremendous blessing it was to me as a young person growing up in a church that had a widespread of all ages in the church, and all the encouragement that came to me from older people in the church that did so much to truly affect the course of my entire life. And the second reason that I thought so much about this is because I have known for a very long time, as I considered my roles and responsibilities here as lead pastor at Tri-State Fellowship, I've understood for a long time that the long-lasting nature of impact in this ministry had to have a multi-generational value about it. That was not a defining part of our founding, nor is it likely the defining part of the founding and the early years and the first generation of any church, but becomes that as time goes by. I knew, have understood all along, that we have to embrace this idea if we are going to find God granting impact through us over a period of years. As I look back at the 4 churches that I referenced that have been a big part of my life, I think of the one that I grew up in, again, my home church in New Jersey, where I went through high school and the college years, up until the time Diane and I were married. It was a very diverse church of generations. I treasure those memories. The church was so much simpler then. It was so much easier to do church then, when the expectation level didn't rise a lot higher than 4 hymns, a choir number, and a special song, and a sermon. And that's pretty much what everybody did in the community. And so people didn't jump from church to gather in and to enjoy this particular flavor of doing church in terms of music or style or a ministry focus or whatever, because pretty much everybody did kind of the same thing. Now, this church had all ages. There were a lot of quirky people in it, but they did stuff together. I remember when I was a teenager how every Sunday night we would have youth group while church was going on, and at the end we would get in cars, the youth leaders, and we'd take off somewhere. And it was called a DU. A DU. We didn't know we didn't know where we were going. It's called Destination Unknown. And what it meant is we were going to somebody's house. And often it was the older people in the church who were opening their doors and having like 30 teenagers or so, in that my youth group, come into their home and to encourage them and to be a part of what was going on. These people got me involved in everything in the church. They got me involved particularly in music things because that was my background. My father was a professional musician. I was adopted. My mother knew that. My natural father was a professional musician. So she's always looking for that in me. And that's why I love this kid that sang up here. This is my kid here because I have never seen a kid in a church more like and living kind of and going through some of the same experiences that I went through at the same age. Early on, they put me up front to sing songs and play the role and do this and do that. And everybody encouraged me. And I don't know, I was always great. I don't think I was as good as you. But they told me I was. And they encouraged me. And they loved me through it. And all of that. And I'm going to tell you something. This guy right here is as good as he is in music. He's even better playing basketball. So I'm telling you, it's not just a music thing. You know what I'm saying? All right, you're my guy. I'm going to walk life with this kid because I see where he's going. I'm excited about it. He's my guy. So understand that. I love you all. That's my guy. All right. Okay. My seminary years, I went to a church in Texas. I was a minister of music on the staff at the church in Texas. Style of ministry was very much the same. Hadn't really shifted a whole lot into the whole contemporary thing that we have nowadays. And so the church was the same, except it was just a lot of really wealthy people. An influential church in the community, but again, of all ages. And they loved being together. They loved doing stuff together. In fact, and they could do something like this, is they could take the whole church. And the whole church would go to Colorado together. The whole church. Just 500 people, 600 people go to Colorado together on a retreat, rent out some big center, and they paid for all of us to go along and do our ministry thing with them. It was just an amazing opportunity. And being in a seminary town with professors who were pastors of the church, like Dwight Pentecost, S. Lewis Johnson were pastors at the church, and elders were seminary professors. They had this role. They understood a role that they had was that they were going to be a church that had a lot of young adults going to seminary. It was a part of their role as a church to encourage these people. There was a guy a few years ahead of me. His name was Chuck Swindoll. And old Mrs. Kelly, 80 years old, she said, "Oh, Chuck, he was one of our boys." Yes, coming through here. And that was a multiple generation church, and God blessed and prospered it so very much. But I went to full-time ministry after seminary back in New Jersey for 11 years in my hometown, not my home church, a different church. And that church was a little bit different. I walked into a church that was mostly older folk and some younger folk, but more heavily weighted on the older generation. But the community was changing. It was changing away from being a former blue-collar industrial town to being rather a bedroom community for central New Jersey, north central New Jersey, major corporations and so on. Folks couldn't afford to live there. They could afford to live in our part of the state over near Pennsylvania. And so it was changing. And so there's this whole young urban, remember yuppies? It was a kind of a yuppie thing going on. Our young urban professionals coming in, and they were becoming part of the church, and they were kind of like my age, so we were the young folks in the church. And the older folk in the church, it was hard. It was it had a lot of really rough transitions because the value systems, the educational systems, everything about it was very, very different from one generation to the other. But ultimately, in large part, that older generation welcomed and embraced these young people, my generation, into this church and gave them opportunities to lead, to grow, and to prosper in that community. And then 19 years ago, I moved from there to this fair city and to this church, newly established in the last decade of baby boomers. Some just a bit older than me, some a bit younger. And man, we had a lot of kids, didn't we? Over these couple of decades, along with more who joined us, we've watched them move through this church as a kind of generational pig being digested through the python, okay? We've seen that go through. We've seen these young adults of our generation. I'm talking about my generation now, my age. We've seen them come through here. We've seen many, many of them go on and move to other places. We've seen many of them go on and go into ministry, like our dear Amy, who's with us today. And we've seen others who have, though, stayed in this community and are still a part of the work that we call Tri-State Fellowship. But in it all, as these 19, 20 years have gone by, the church has changed from a baby boomer church with a lot of kids as being the constituent largest parcel of the church to being a church that is truly composed of and comprised of, as you look around today, we got one of everything in here. We are a multiple generation church. We don't have to go do something to have all the generations here. We are already there. Here's the big idea, what I'm going for in this introduction, and that's to say that this can be the most awesome era and experience of our church life together if we embrace it well and we serve one another, or if we, being young or old, insist on our own preferences, our tastes, to be the one that dominates because that's the way we like it for our age and our generation, or else we're going to bolt out the door if we don't get it our way. We're going to struggle and we're going to fail to embrace the richness that can be a great church of multiple generations under one roof together, serving one another in biblical and godly ways. And so, as I have for so long, I want to again address this subject that I believe is the main issue that God has placed on my heart for this last decade or so. And it becomes the first component of the vision statement that we have adopted. The biblical sound basis of being truly a multiple generation church community. And selling this vision and getting folks to truly embrace this with passion has been the most difficult thing that I have ever found to do in church ministry in my 30-some years now of doing it. But let me try again. Let me come at you again with this proposal. Because if we will embrace it, I am convinced, and I'm convinced on the authority of the Scriptures, that it can be the most life-giving thing that we can do together in this church that will enrich every one of us if we'll give ourselves to it. As we go through this series, we want to kind of lay out each of the topics in a sort of problem, solution, application basis, stating the problem. The problem is this. First of all, the generations are easily divided for many reasons. It's easy to divide upon generational lines. The Scriptures are full of stories where generations and families struggled because of competing values and worldviews. The Old Testament essentially ends in its final couple of verses by speaking of the mess that exists in a broken and fractured and sin-soaked world. The social fabric is divided, even at the most intimate of places and relationships, a parent and child. There was a divide that needed to be healed. These are the final words of the Old Testament. The final two verses in Malachi chapter 4. See, I send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So we see that there is this divide that's there because of the condition of sin in the world. It's a natural divide. Sociologists today speak of this divide as being one where in previous generations the value in life was placed upon honor. The honor that went with someone filling a role in life as an aged person or a role to perform in a culturally determined way. As a mother, to do that well. As a teacher, to excel in that. And that is what brought meaning and honor to life. But the whole shift that's taken place over the last handful of decades in our culture has been to place value rather on dignity. This means that value is found in achieving personal happiness. The byproduct of the whole self-esteem movement is a generation or two that feels entitled to personal satisfaction. But I believe that the Scriptures call us to, rather than personal satisfaction, to what I call preference deference. Deferring your own preferences in order to serve other people. But beyond the cultural shifts that have happened, there are certain other features of life that have changed in society in recent generations. The whole idea of geography and how people move from place to place so much more rapidly and commonly in our culture. That was not true. In previous generations, families were together under one roof. My father had his grandparents right there in the house. When he was a little boy, his grandparents were right there in the house, and that was very, very common. We see the shifts that technology has brought us, the changes that happen rapidly, and how previous generations, what they would view as extravagance, current generations view as necessity. Technological advancement means that younger generations live in a parallel universe, often, of social media, text messaging, and Snapchatting, and all of that. And sometimes it becomes almost like a completely separate language. The generations, it's like they're speaking different languages. We might point out as well just the sense of busyness that life has taken on in our most modern world. There's no collective downtime. Married couples find themselves often working even radically different shifts, day and night. Our children are bombarded with it through schoolwork, through sports practices, through extracurricular activities, and just the plethora of opportunities that are there to make our lives complicated and difficult and busy, and has us all the time spread out. Every Sunday I sit here and I'm grieved by the folk who are doing wonderful things, but they're not here. They're gone. They're doing something because of the busyness of life. All of this I'm saying is, I'm not giving even a right or wrong statement. I'm just saying that's where the world's at. And all of it, what it does is it tends to fracture us generationally and pull us apart. It's an uphill battle, and it's hard for churches to win. The uphill battle against generational unity. Or decline, rather, to win the battle against decline or against fracturing, to win the battle for unity in the church for all of these reasons. But there's a solution, and that is to be united around the unifying truth of the gospel. United around the unifying truth of the gospel. Luke chapter 1, verse 17. Luke quotes from Malachi chapter 4, verse 6. This is essentially the flip side of the page from the Old Testament to the New Testament. When you go from the end of the Old Testament, you flip the page over. Of course, you come to Matthew, but of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the synoptic gospels. Luke 1 is just as early as Matthew 1. In fact, it's earlier. And so what you're basically doing is we go from the passage we just read to this passage here in Luke 1. Basically, we just turn the page, and we're reading what's on the other side in terms of God's program and timing. Though 400 years have passed, Luke picks up with the final words from Malachi. And speaking here, Luke is speaking of the ministry of John the Baptist in this context. How John was sent ahead of Christ to prepare the people for a ministry of repentance and for the coming of the King. It says he will bring back many, speaking of John, many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. You see what's happening? John is coming. He's setting the way for Christ, who is following. And he is setting it up that there is a solution to the fracturing that's gone on in the world, and families and generations and all of whatever has people fractured. The answer is going to be Christ, and it's going to be the gospel. The King is coming, and he is preparing the way. The scriptures anticipate that the church community was going to be one that was diverse in its constitution, including every age and generation. And it's seen in the scriptures as a strength, where there's a mutual support in every direction. Consider this passage from 1 Timothy 4, where Paul wrote to Timothy, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, in purity." It was a challenge for Timothy as a young man, perhaps with a bit of a timid personality. And Paul says, be God's man. Don't worry about the age. Be God's man in front of everyone. And you turn over the page to the next chapter, 1 Timothy 5, speaking again to Timothy how to work in the context of a church with multiple generations. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. So, the essence of the solution is to remember and to value that we have God's work in this world, that we are to be about together in all generations, serving one another faithfully as we move forward in serving the Lord. The Jewish people understood this, and they sought to put this into practice and to make it a part of their understanding. Look at this passage in Psalm 145. Very devout Jewish families would include this passage in their meditations 3 times a day. It says, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. So these folks understood that what it was to be about, what they were to be about in front of other generations, was reflecting upon the thing that brought us together, God's work in the world. And of course, God's work in the world in the New Testament includes, of course, the work of Christ and what he has done. And he has given us each other that together we may proclaim this truth, particularly from older generations to younger generations, that they may know and live in light of this truth. And so focusing on this passage was an intentional act for Jewish people to stimulate remembrance and to teach generations. And the whole idea of intentionality is so important. And that's where we go to the whole idea now of application, thirdly, today. Yes, to be intentional. Intentional in the way we live. Intentional about the things that we say, all that we do. And for this, we go to Deuteronomy 6. Can you believe we're back talking about Deuteronomy again? We went through all the Deuteronomy back there in the spring of this year. But what great scriptures are there. Moses gave a lot of thought toward how truth was to be passed down from generation to generation in Israel. He had to give it thought because he himself was not going to be with them. Remember, as we looked about this whole thing in Deuteronomy, he himself was not going to be allowed by God to cross the Jordan, to go into this promised land. He was going to lead them to the door, but Joshua was going to take them in. And as he had a heart for these people that he had led, and wanting to see them prosper in this land and truly find God's blessing and fulfillment, he gave a lot of thought to how is that going to happen when I'm not there and generation after generation is coming along. He was going to have to teach them in advance. And that's what this Deuteronomy chapter 6 is about. It's Moses teaching them in advance in the face of, it's about revival in the face of generational transition. Moses has clear and specific instructions regarding the way that God's law was to be passed from one generation to the next. And these first verses delineate the unique nature of the true faith and the one true God that would prevent the youth of these generations and others who would follow from chasing after the idols that predominated the ancient world. Everybody had idols. The gods of the Jews of Israel was a completely different situation in that. It had nothing to do with idols. It had to do with a relationship with the one true and living God. How are younger generations going to stand against the idols that surrounded them without intentionality to the message of the truth of what God had done historically in the nation being intentionally passed on to them? These first verses here describe how the God of Israel is different. It says, these are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. This is like the main verse of the Old Testament. This is, if you took the Old Testament down to a verse, this is it right here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's what I'm saying. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us unique. It's not about the idols that are out there. It's about the one true God. Love this God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And faith was more to it than a tradition to be observed in a holy day here and there, once a week or whenever. But rather, it was to be a life that was lived thoughtfully for God in everything. It was to be an entire way of life. And that's what he goes on to say in the following verses. Because it says, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. You see, by nature, our reality only goes so far as our personal remembrances and experiences. That's a reality for us. The rest of true reality that precedes us and that is bigger than the experiences that we have needs to be taught to us. And in turn, we need to know how do we teach that to others who are coming after us, to our children, first in our homes and then corporately together in the community of faith in the church. Moses knew that they would forget these things unless they took diligent, specific steps to remember them and to teach them. And this is because they would tend to just enjoy the good things of the world around them and forget God. Is that not what happens? It's a timeless truth. It happens in our generation. Here's what would happen to them. They're going into a promised land. They're going to go in and they're going to conquer. There's going to be cities there. There's going to be wells there. There's going to be vineyards growing and all of that. And he says to them, when the Lord brings you to the land, to Abraham, sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with cities. You didn't build houses and all the good things and vineyards and olive groves. I'm going on quickly. Verse 13, fear the Lord your God and serve him only and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow after other gods. In other words, don't forget the gods, the true God, and follow the gods of the people around you. For the Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you did at Massah. Oh, Massah. Oh, they're thinking at this point, surely, why'd you have to bring that up? This is a story from the time of the Exodus of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. They'd rather forget it, but it was an event that they needed to remember so that they would not repeat this kind of event in their lives. The people under Moses at Massah, they were thirsty. They didn't have enough water, and they were crying out to Moses. They were murmuring about it. They were complaining about it, and they were doubting that God was really with them because it seemed to them that no water means God's not with us. In fact, he's brought us out here to perish, and Moses, you're the guy who led us. All of this is the scene. Why should they think this? Really, why should they think this? They had seen water come from the rock previously in their experience. They'd seen all the other miracles that had brought them in safety out of the land of Egypt. And still, in light of all of that, they looked around at their circumstances and they did not obey God, and it infuriated the Lord. And so, remember Massah. That's a story here that is Exhibit A of unbelief in the nation of Israel. And not only here, but in several other contexts and passages in the Old Testament. And so the exhortation in here is remember Massah? Remember it? Don't be like that. Don't be like that. But that is how people will be. That is how our children will be. That is how our youth will be, especially if we don't help them remember the things that God has done in our life, and as one generation, share it with the next. And the role that I have as lead pastor in this place is to remember, to remind you, to remember, and to help the rising generations to remember what it is that God has done down through the corridors of time into our day. And so as I quickly end here, are you helping people? Are you helping others? Are you helping other generations? Are you investing in generations other than your own? If you're a younger generation, you need to invest by getting to know some people who are older. Some of the older folk around here. They've got information. They've got experiences that you need to be successful in life. And you can help them in many practical ways as well as the years go by. And they have needs in their homes and with their lives. And we have avenues of ministry for this. Meal ways that you can help and practical ways to help the people and their properties and so on. I encourage you to invest as a young person in the older generations who are here. And then to the older generations, I speak to you as I have spoken to you all along. I have told you the truth. And I know the truth isn't always popular. But the truth is that it is your greater obligation to give up your preferences and to seek out the youth and the young people and the young adults in this congregation, to encourage them and to disciple them. Many of you have done that, and I applaud you for it because I am convinced that it is the biblical truth. Even as we mourn the lost departure of some others who have not been willing to take up this opportunity to serve and be rewarded in great ways for their service. I'll never understand that. I will never understand it because it seems to me like being at an amusement park, waiting in a long line for an hour to get to the ride, getting up to the actual gate of the ride, and then going off to another ride and getting to the back of the line, because as the truth is told, you'd rather stand in line and hang out with your friends than enjoy the ride itself. I will never understand it. But I encourage you as older people to give up your preferences and to invest in younger generations, because that is where great opportunity is for personal satisfaction and great opportunity as well for us as a church. But I'm going to tell you the truth as well. The leadership and I have failed you often in this regard by talking about this and expecting you to somehow just sort of figure it out and go do it. And we see it happening. Like, look at this picture. I caught someone doing it last week. This picture here. There's Eddie. Eddie's not here today. I was going to pick on him. But there's Eddie. I took this picture last Sunday, sitting right back there where the Thorpes are. He turned around, he saw a young family there, and he got down, and he spent that 5 minutes of greeting, talking with this young man, and just hearing about him and encouraging him and being a blessing to him. But too much we've expected you to just kind of know what to do and to make it happen. And so we're going to provide more specific, definitive vehicles for this to happen. In fellowship groups, you're going to hear Tim especially talking about all the fellowship groups that begin and serving together. And being a part of it, yes, enjoying the fellowship, but then in ways of serving, younger to older, older to younger, and so forth, as needs are known. And then secondly, as well in classes, such as these parenting classes he's talking about. We're going to work it. Some of you who have had your children kind of getting out there in the world, we're going to ask you to come in a week at a time, here and there, to these classes and say, here's where it went well. If I had it to do over, I wouldn't do this. And help these younger generations that we have here. So my final word is to look at where you are in life's path. Figure out where you are. You're closer to the end, closer to the beginning, somewhere in the middle. If you got people ahead of you, look to invest and follow and be discipled by people ahead of you. If you got people behind you, think about how can I be a blessing to them and reach back and serve them as well. And let's connect together. Let's be God's people in a multi-generational way. We got to do it. If this isn't, you're going to have to come with me. To get me to stop talking about this, you're going to have to bring the scriptures to me and say, I don't believe you got this right. Here's where it's... No. We're just supposed to enjoy hanging out together with ourselves and fellowshipping with people like ourselves, all young people, all open. If you can do that with the scriptures, I'll change my tune. But until then, it's a cross-generational, multi-generational church. It can be our greatest blessing. It can be our greatest opportunity. I ask you to pick that up, and let's make it happen together. Come on, let's go do it, okay? Father, thank you for the privilege we have to serve you by serving each other. You just didn't throw us out there all by ourselves in the world, but you've given us each other. Help us truly to be a blessing to each other across generations. Help us to catch this vision and to move forward with it with vigor, with excitement, with energy, and bless us as we go, meeting our needs as we meet the needs of others. Father, today we understand that our dear friend Fred has suffered a fall, Fred Craver. And we don't know the circumstances, but it sounds like he's in not a good way. Our hearts go out to him and to Norma. Thank you for the model they've been of faith in this community. So our hearts go out to them. We give them to you, and God help us to know how to be quick to serve them. So thank you for this good day that we've enjoyed together, and the opportunity to be your people in this place, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.